Good start.
Yes.
Hello, 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 and welcome to the Right Here, Right Now podcast. I'm Karen,
I'm Claire.
And I'm Paula.
and we are here to provide you with all the bookish goodness you could possibly need. So, this has been a while in the making and a while in the planning. And the three of us did use a podcast before, but it's been quite a few years. So we're a bit
It was in the
rusty.
before times.
Yeah. I don't even know when. It seems like forever ago now,
What do we
doesn't it?
say? Pre-COVID, it was pretty much.
Definitely pre-COVID, yes. So yeah, we're a little bit rusty, but bear with us, we will get better. So to begin with, I thought what we would do is say a little hello and introduce ourselves. Who wants to go first?
I can if you want.
Go on, Claire, take it away.
I'm Claire. I'm from the West Midlands of the UK. I write paranormal romance and I'm training to be a proofreader.
Fantastic. I'm very excited for your proofreading journey. How's it
I'm
going? It's
very
going good?
excited. Yes.
Paula, would you like to take the next step?
Sure. I'm Paula, and I'm from Chicago, Illinois, in the States. And I'm a blogger. I've always been interested in writing, but I've been in so many different fields: sales. I've been in animal welfare, you name it. I'm the jack of all trades, but I love blogging and hoping to get more into blogging as I have a little more time these days. And I'm a huge tennis player. So,
Paula is an exceptional tennis player. Tell them what you did.
well, I'm very excited to say that I actually made the national championships that I'm playing for at the end of October. So this has been a life. So who says you have to be dead at 55? I'm getting 55 and I'm still kicking and doing well. So there you go.
Amazing. It's brilliant. You've done so well. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. Very excited.
So probably some of you will know me already from my editing page. I'm from the southwest of England, but now I live in the northeast, so I did a total switch. But my day job is an editor and a writing coach. And I'm also the owner of the Right Here, Right Now community, which is what we've named the podcast after. It's full of amazing authors and amazing writing tips, because in my day job, I can't physically reach as many people as I would like to. So I started the community and the membership as a way to kind of reach more people, help more people. And I really, really love my job. Hence the extension with a podcast.
And you're an author.
I am an author. That is also important. That's
what started it all for you, really. If you hadn't started writing, you would have never branched out into editing and then into your community.
That's very true. So I write also under the name Clare. Many of you will know that. Some of you may not. Some of you be like, "Oh, that's her." Although, admittedly, my pen name has been retired somewhat, but it's coming back. It's fighting to get free again. Writing is so. Author career will be relaunching or is relaunching as we speak. So I'm excited about that too.
Yes, I'm excited about
that. Absolutely, very exciting, very exciting.
So this month for our first episode, with it being Halloween episode is what I was trying to say. We are going to talk about villains today. So villains are a very important part of stories. Whether you write romance or fantasy or paranormal, whatever genre it is, villains almost always play a role. And they're not always the easiest characters to write. If you write a kind of flat villain, you're not doing the job. You want to make your villains well-rounded. So I have some tips today on how to write a villain that will pop off the page and either terrify or just basically mess things up for your story. So first and foremost, motivation. This is important with all characters that you write, but it's almost more so with a villain because you have to know the reason why they're doing what they do. Sometimes that looks quite basic. It's like, well, this person pissed me off in the past, so I'm going to get revenge. Sometimes it's that straightforward. Sometimes it is deeper. I'm just checking my notes because I write really badly and now I can't understand anything I've written. So, situation normal in that sense. Example. So for the motivation, The example I thought of was the witch from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so the reason she is evil, as it were, is that she heard a prophecy that suggested that her downfall would come from two sons of Adam and two daughters of Eve. So that is her motivation, is
Can I
basically
just
not being
interject
taken
here?
out. You may.
If you've read the whole series, the White Witch is actually introduced in the prequel book, The Magician's Nephew. She isn't from Narnia. She's from another world, the people before the pensive children, and she's pretty much evil in that as well. Basically,
that's right.
Her whole city has turned to stone because she said the deplorable word, and I don't know what it is, but there's this like magic word that if you say it screws everything up. So I think she probably went into Narnia with the intention of being in charge and being a tyrant, and then heard the prophecy and was like, crap.
Yeah, but the basic kind of the motivation for her going after these kids, which is quite an odd thing to do.
Yes,
is that her downfall was meant to come from these children or humans potentially. I'm quite sure in fact which way it falls. But the motivation was
that humans.
Yeah, I don't think that would be the case. Yeah, the motivation was basically not wanting to lose power from humans. There are many examples in literary fiction. Who's got a good one?
Anyone? I have one, but it's not literary fiction, it's movie.
Okay, that's okay, that works.
Star Wars.
Okay.
I love Star Wars, and I think the two motivations of the two like main villains, Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis, it's really interesting because no, it's not Darth Vader. Plagueis is the one before. I'm getting right. Darth Vader is the one we all know in the big mask.
Yes.
Darth Sidious is his master, the old man.
Yeah.
And their two motivations are really interesting because Darth Sidious, his motivation is he just wants to rule and be evil. He wants to rule the galactic empire.
Sometimes Vader, it can be that simple.
Yeah. Darth Vader, if you don't see the prequel trilogy, you will just think he's evil too, and he's doing what Sidious tells him. But actually, it's because he was manipulated into doing Sidious's bidding. He was a Jedi. He got married, that Jedis aren't supposed to, and he was having dreams of his wife dying.
Okay.
And Sidious actually implanted those dreams into his mind so that he turned to the dark side. And then Sidious is all like, well, did you know on the dark side there's a way that you can like stop people from dying? So I think it's interesting you can have two types of villains.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you break it down, there are an awful lot of different villain types that you can go for.
Yeah.
But that right away suddenly becomes more interesting. Like,
yes.
So when you look at it at face value, you've got a basic villain. And obviously as backstory kind of comes through, you find more and more about, the reasons why. But that is why motivation is important. You can't just kind of have a just because there has to be a reason behind it. I am so bad at writing. Backstory. The next thing is backstory, which, as we've just kind of established, does link in with motivation quite often. I'm thinking, so Maleficent is an example I used here, and I had to do some research because my memory for fairy tales is quite bad at this point in my life.
I don't know the actual fairy tale. I know the Disney version, so I'd love to hear what.
So I didn't go into full detail because I'm very aware of how long we talk and limited time. But so Maleficent was portrayed as basically as evil, the evil queen. Queen, stepmother, Jesus Christ. Maleficent, no, queen, right?
Maleficent is Sleeping Beauty, evil queen.
Yes, queen, yes. I had a moment there, I was like, no, I was getting my Sleeping Beauties and my Cinderellas all over them. But the reason apparently Maleficent became evil was when she was actually betrayed. So again, betrayal is always a very good motivation for
and it shows that in the Disney live action movies Maleficent
Yes.
actually starts off as good, and then the betrayal happens, and you see the full picture.
Yeah, and stuff like that is important because if you have a villain, you don't, it's very hard because if you have a villain, you want to show them as the villain, but you also get to play with the reader's minds a little bit when you introduce an element of trauma or a
Yeah,
backstory that is where you can almost feel bad for them. And it's a fine line between making the characters feel too sorry for them and then you don't
mm.
hate them anymore. But it's very important to look at your backstory of your villain.
I think that ties into what I was saying about there being two types of villains, because there's a type, they're evil, they're doing evil stuff, and you want to see the hero defeat them. And then there's the other villain that may have trauma in their past, and you want to see them redeemed.
Yes,
Well, that's a good
absolutely.
point. What about, like Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy? He's one who
Mm.
is definitely, I would say his motivation is power, all out power. But in some
But
way, you kind of, when you read the books and then you see the
yeah,
movies too, in a way, I always kind of felt sorry for him because he comes
yeah,
across as a sympathetic figure. He definitely has a backstory, and you kind of look at it, and I think writing villains is I think the goal to write a good villain is to give a great backstory, to have motivation of why they turned into what they are, and to have some sort of a feeling when the reader reads it, they have some kind of sympathy for their plight a little bit. Yes, you
yeah,
want to see your hero defeat them, but you can't take away that humanity part of them saying what happened to them caused them to do what they're doing. So
Yeah.
I would
I
say,
think it's really important when you're writing any character to know what their backstory is. It's almost more so with a villain because there is always a lot to unpack there.
yeah,
And it's also you get the choice because you don't, even if you know the backstory, you don't, that doesn't have to come out on the page. You don't have to
yeah,
necessarily share every single thing that you learn or decide or choose for your character. As long as you know what it is and that if someone challenges you, you can make it make sense. That's the
mm.
important part. But if you want to share some of it, as in, because Gollum, I think that does need more, I think. So I would like to find out more about that. I have never read the books because
Right.
they
The
are
books touches
particularly
on it
long.
more. I would
Yeah,
say in the books it shows you that why he wasn't particularly a nice person. He wasn't outright
exactly.
evil. The One Ring corrupted him.
yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the ring definitely corrupted him. My God, it just. But yeah, I think those kind of. I always like when I'm reading a book or watching a program. You don't want to root for the villain, but you have to feel like a sympathy too of what created the problem. And then there's the
Mm.
ones that are just plain evil, and there's no rhyme or reason to have any sympathy for them.
Yeah.
It's a complex thing to create, just like
It
heroes
sure
are.
is. And I think my favorite um example of, excuse my language, but mindfuckery is you, because I've never read the books from that, but I have seen the TV show. And he is like just awful. Awful. He does
Yes.
terrible, terrible things, and yet you find yourself going, please don't get caught, please don't get caught. And it's like, what have you
Yeah,
done
you're
to my
kind of
brain?
rooting for him at times.
Yeah.
I get that. You feel twisted in a way because it's like, wait a minute, this guy's awful.
Yeah, I mean, in season one, I did genuinely want him arrested. And then season two came along, and I was like, okay, well, we don't want him to disappear. But genuinely, you still, even though I did definitely want him arrested at the end of season one, there's still a part of me that's like, yeah, but it's so interesting to watch. Because again, and it's again backstory, you get to see glimpses into his past of things that happened to him,
Yeah.
and then you understand why he's like this. But then we kind of get into choices, I suppose, because
Mm.
that's a whole other situation. But you don't have to you don't have to become a product of your past, but you can
Yes.
see why it could happen. And that's why the backstory becomes such a big deal.
So let
So
me ask
also,
you this.
oh sorry, go on.
When you're creating a villain, do you come up with their backstory first and then move forward and then write it in? Or how does one go about doing that? That's one thing. I mean, I always think having the backstory then kind of weaving it into the story somewhat. I don't know. Do you have to have a full backstory before you actually start writing the villain, or
So
what do you do?
I'm gonna throw that to Claire because I mostly write romance, so my villains are less like
I was going
villainy.
to actually ask you about romance villains, but
Okay, we
with
can come
my
back to that, but
villains,
you go first.
with my villains, often they're tied to an element in the story. Like in my current paranormal romance, the hero and the villains are the same race of creatures. So the backstory all kind of loops round to one theme, but it wouldn't be, I wouldn't have everything set in stone when I begin writing. I'll just have a general idea. And if something shifts as I'm writing, then I'll allow it to shift.
That makes sense.
That's a
Villains
great.
and romance. Villains and romance is a whole different thing, I guess, because it depends on.
Yeah, I really struggle with this, especially if there's like, because obviously if there's, say if it's romantic suspense and there's like a kidnapper or something, that's clear who the villain is.
Sure,
But
yeah.
like if it's just a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, and their obstacles are kind of their selves and their behavior, who's the villain?
Absolutely. Yeah, that it's so funny. That's something I was thinking about. It ties into my next point as well, sort of. But yeah, in a romance, often the villain is an element of themselves, not themselves personally, but it could be a form or anxiety that's stopping them from getting in the relationship, or something that happened in their past that they're trying to overcome. Trying to think about, like, my book, I've got a book called Picture Imperfect, and the lead female has been cheated on. So she's kind of like, but she is a romantic. And the male lead is an absolute wedding cynic. He doesn't, no, never in a million years am I getting married. And the story is that she owns a bridal boutique and she needs him to help her save the business. And he sort of does it the whole time, being kind of a dick about it. Like, marriage is stupid. What's the point? And she's like, listen, I didn't ask for your views on marriage. I just need you to take some photos. um, so it becomes, so for her, it's sort of deciding whether to crack through this kind of dickish exterior. And for him, his story is, I'm not going to ruin it, but he's got a backstory that's kind of would 100% make you not want to ever think about getting married. So his journey, so the villain in that story is really his past, and his childhood trauma. And for her, it's kind of trusting after being cheated on. So villains in a kind of generic contemporary setting are usually an element of personality rather than actual being, unless there's like an ex maybe that comes in to try and scupper their plans. You know, there's always that option. In a romantic suspense, it could be, God, anything. Like you said, it could be a kidnapper, it could be anything. But yeah, in villains in contemporary romance, I would say are not so much people but personality traits almost.
Or abstract concepts, like the concept of fearing a new relationship because of cheating.
Yeah,
or betrayal, that kind of stuff. Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's actually, now we've got into it, that's quite interesting, because I was only really looking at it from the view of bad guys as I was planning this out.
Yeah,
but looking at it in terms of romance, it suddenly becomes a bit more interesting. But next on the list of things to think about with villains is complex morality. Now, this is where you have the bad guy doing a bad thing for a good reason. So I'm using something that you wouldn't think of them being bad guys because they're not, but superheroes are quite an interesting way of looking at this, because while you don't perceive them as bad guys because they're not, they're trying to do a good thing, and they're called heroes. But when you think about things, look, I mean, obviously there's comic books, so they count. But when you think about things like the Marvel movies, where you see things where they're on a mission to do a certain thing, but they've basically wiped out buildings and people. And so there is this destruction and aftermath of all these things that they were doing for a good reason, but unthinking about all of the lives they were shattering around this thing that they were doing. And I think if you're creating something like that, you have, it's quite quite a delicate line to walk in a way.
Yes. And that comes up in the first Avengers movie, and then really nicely segues into like more plots in the Avengers universe, because then people without superpowers are saying, well, look at all the destruction they've done, should we have some accountability, some sort of policing on them?
That's where Civil War kind of gets crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like the one side of going, yes, we need to be controlled, and the other's going, no, we don't. And then it becomes a whole big thing.
That's a whole thing with like people with abilities.
Yes, and I think morality is, again, it's something that comes up with all characters.
Yeah.
And with villains, it almost depends on how villainy you want. Because I think you've got Batman. Like Batman wants to solve crime. He wants to catch bad guys. But it's the same thing of, okay, but in doing this, what chaos am I also causing?
But there's a line Batman never crosses. He never kills. There's actually a really good, I'm trying to think what, I think it's the Injustice arc. Basically, Batman has enough. No, it's not Batman. Superman has enough of Joker and says to like Batman, why are you not killing him? Like, he's done all this bad thing. You take him to Arkham, he escapes, he hurts more people. If you just killed him, that would be the end of it. And then the Joker, I think, kills or hurts a pregnant Lois Lane, and Superman loses his shit and kills the Joker. Which you think, is that the right thing? And then it just completely breaks the DC universe, and like you've got people turning evil that you'd never expect, people turning good that you wouldn't expect, and it's just, was Batman
That's
right?
interesting, and I think also that is where the morality is. It's like,
Yeah,
what is your breaking point?
yeah,
What is the point at which you would flip and go against everything you never thought you would do? If you know, your moral compass is, if you're never going to kill, what is the line that pushes you over the edge?
yeah.
I think it's interesting with Batman, because if you look at his backstory, his parents were shot in cold blood. And I think he's very much, he's a vigilante without being, a murderer, if that makes sense. He really is out for, arresting people, getting them, taking them to the law to obviously be jailed, but you never see him kill anyone. And you're right. What is the breaking point? Obviously, we know Superman's breaking point is Lois Lane, but it's, I would say with Batman, I always was interested in him because he had the right attitude of getting the criminals off the street, but not causing a ton of destruction in his wake as much as he could. So
yeah, it's like you're saying with Batman, even when he finds his parents' killer, he doesn't then go and murder this person. Batman has other tragedies. I'm sure one of the Robins gets murdered.
Yeah.
He doesn't then go and kill the Robin's murderer. That's this hard line he never crosses.
He almost takes he doesn't believe in the eye for an eye. He truly believes in justice. That's what he's looking for, is, people are going to pay for their crimes. It's not on me to make that happen, but he almost goes back to the justice system, hoping that they would take care of what needs to be done, which it's an interesting point with everybody.
Love talking about superheroes. I'm not as well versed. Claire's like obviously the queen of superhero stuff. I'm only a semi nerd, but but I do enjoy the chatter about superheroes. So the other thing as well we've got to think about with villains are goals and obstacles. Again, same with all characters really. That when you're writing a blurb for a book, for example, that's pretty much what it comes down to. What do they want? What's in the way? How do they get there? What's the problem? What's the consequence? So for villains, it's the same thing. What is it that they want? What is standing in the way? And that is usually going to be your main character. That's usually the thing standing in the way. So again, a clear kind of direction of where you're going, how it's gonna unfold. And I know not everyone plots these things too far ahead. I'm not a big plotter either, because it stresses me out if I try to plot too succinctly. But you at least do need to have kind of a rough idea of what things are,
what you're building
going to be
towards.
in the way. Yeah, definitely. Finally, I need to read that. Cliches. exactly. I hate a
Right.
cliche. You'll hear me say cliche 3 billion times. Anyone who has ever worked with me is like, oh God, oh, that damn cliches. Uh, but cliches, you don't want cliches in anything you write.
Yeah.
But villains, if you think about, I hit the word villain and my brain goes Disney. Disney villains it's a thing.
Sometimes there's a time and place for like mustache twirling cliche villains.
Sure, absolutely. But I think oftentimes a villain could be described as disfigured, scarred, physically
Yeah.
scarred. Often can be described as very unattractive. But then on the flip side, these days we do like a good-looking villain as well, and that's almost become a cliche of itself.
Don't get me started on that. You know my obsession of hot villains.
Where should we begin on this? But hold on,
Yes.
let me clarify, and then we'll move on to that. But
Yes.
you just want to be very careful of making sure that the villain you're creating is fitting for your story.
Yeah.
Also to ensure that you're not kind of leaning too heavily on a cliche like physical scarring. Unless obviously there's a very specific need for that to be the case. But don't be just kind of throwing in cliches for the sake of it, because your editor will be coming after you with a big red pen.
There's a fine line with tropes, not, as you said, not just villains, but anything in writing. There's a fine line you have to walk to do something that's expected and something that the reader will approve of, but also going off the deep end, like you said, oh, they're evil because they've got scars.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean it can be, because obviously if the element of the story was that this terrible thing that happened to them at some point was what changed them, like it happens for sure. But I would always steer away from doing what's obvious in terms of a villain.
Yes. I think I'm only basing this on one villain I can think of, but they seem to have a predisposition for evilness anyway. So regardless of whether that thing happened, the example I was thinking of is Billy Russo from the Punisher TV series.
I don't know that one.
It's Ben Barnes, so I love it.
Okay.
But he's obviously it's Ben Barnes, he's very attractive. And in the end of season 1, when he's fighting the Punisher smashes his face into glass and his face gets all disfigured and he becomes the villain Jigsaw, and that kind of influences his season 2 arc. But the character of Billy Russo wasn't the nicest, sanest person before he got disfigured, and it could be theorized that he would have gone off the deep end and gone evil without the disfigurement.
Interesting.
Well, I have one for you. Claire will appreciate this one. It's from the superheroes, Harvey Two-Face.
I was just thinking about that myself.
Because I mean, very handsome guy who's playing, I think it's Aaron Eckhart, I believe, is playing Harvey Two-Face, but you know, a crusader. He was an attorney. He's obviously believes in justice. And he got disfigured and turned completely. So it's kind of interesting here. You have this man who, the beginning of the movie is, or in the comic series, I could say that too, is what he was definitely on the right side of the law, and here he gets disfigured and goes through all his thing, and now he's now he becomes the villain, which is kind of interesting. I mean, even in real life, you look at some of the villains who are the unlikeliest people, like they talk about the serial killer Ted Bundy, who looked like the guy next door. You never, I mean, you can't just look at him like, oh, he's evil. No, he looks like just your boy next door, and that's what's even more disarming. It's like it's like the devil next to you. You don't know that he is actually very evil and not a good person. So you got to be careful with that too.
You kind of, I think it's probably based on things we've seen on TV and read in books, that you think that if someone was going to be a psychopath, you would be able to tell just by looking at them, and that's very much not the case.
Yes,
Game of Thrones has got
no, sorry. I'm sorry, Claire, you go first.
I was going to say, Game of Thrones has got a brilliant example of that. The Crown Prince, Joffrey, he's perfect, green eyes, blonde hair, really attractive. And one of the characters, Sansa, is betrothed to him, and she's all like really starstruck because he's like, oh, he's the perfect man and everything. He's a piece of fucking shit. He's one of the worst characters in that series. When he died, people cheered, but you wouldn't think of it if you first saw him. You'd think, God, he's like Prince Charming.
Hot.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it goes, I mean, this is kind of going off on a tangent because it's related, but it's a little bit tangenty. But it's thinking about I suppose it's perceptions, but in romance where you have this very good looking guy who is an absolute dick.
Yeah.
But the girl is still into it. It's like, interesting. But then in a romance, they're not generally murdery, so it's, it's a bit different. But there's kind of that side of it as well.
And if they are murdery, there's usually a reason, and it's kind of like justified.
Back to the motivation.
Yes.
I think we've gone full circle there, which is a good thing. Lovely. So I think kind of that wraps up our main tips. But when we think of villains, who are our favourite villains that we like the most?
Right. It depends on what you mean by favourite, because I have two categories. Villains that I love, that I secretly root for, like Sauron. I'm sorry, I'm a huge Sauron fangirl because he's hot. Well, he's not always hot, but he can shapeshift and he turns into a hot man. So it's like root for him. Then there's ones like that you want to see them get their comeuppance, and like the Joker.
Yeah, Joker.
He's evil. You want to see Batman throw him in Arkham. You don't ever want him to get out of Arkham.
Yeah, he's properly deranged.
Yeah.
Well, mine is, I would say Hannibal Lecter is probably one of my favorites.
Hannibal's brilliant.
I mean, I've read the books, I've seen all the movies, and it's so, the way that character is written is brilliant. I mean, he is just he's a psychopath, there's no question. But it's like, he's one of these types where you don't know, I mean, in a way, you kind of are like, you want to see him get his comeuppance, but he's so damn brilliant too at being so evil.
Yeah, you kind of enjoy the ride. What did you think of the Hannibal TV show? Did that change your perception of him?
It was interesting. I wasn't as, Mads Mikkelsen was very interesting. He was a very good Hannibal.
Amazing.
But I actually saw the original, it was called Manhunter, which was Brian Cox.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So he did the original Hannibal. And then, of course, once you watch Anthony Hopkins, there's no other. I mean, he just so good. And the funny thing is, after I've seen him in so many movies before Silence of the Lambs, he's such a good actor. He can play the greatest of guys. He was great in Howard's End in all of these movies. And then he plays, I mean, the quintessential evil person in Hannibal. And you know what? He was phenomenal. I mean, he literally scared the hell out of me. And he didn't have to say very much, just the stare, just a couple of words he said, and it's like, it literally sent shivers up your spine. I'm like, oh. But yeah, Hannibal would probably be one of my favorite villains, if you will. So
I'm so light-hearted in comparison to you guys. I wish there was like a really full-on psychotic. I mean, I always think Joe from You is actually quite a good villain to like.
No, it is a good one.
Because he is completely whacked out. Like, he's done some deranged things, like completely mad. And it is, I have sat there watching the show going, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, why are you rooting for him? He's awful. As you worry there's something wrong with your brain, like.
No. I mean, but I think a bit to your point, I think to go full circle, the person who wrote the character of Joe wanted to put something in that he could be somewhat likable. I mean, that's the whole beauty of it. There is an element of likability there. I know he's psycho. He's nuts, no question. But he's not completely nuts. There's some part of him that you can connect to on a level. And
it is because it's what he seems to have always wanted, was to be loved by someone. That seems to be his driving force, I guess. And that rather than kind of deal with rejection, he just kills people, which is not the best way to handle it. That's putting it mildly. Don't ever kill people. Right? But
exactly.
but you can see, when you look at his past and you kind of see all these little glimpses as when he was a little boy, And when he's meeting these women, and you can see for him, it's like, I just want someone to love me. That's what it is. I think it has changed somewhat over the seasons, as to, he was married and all these other things happened. But ultimately, kind of, he was motivated by finding someone to be with, I guess.
Yeah.
To have a family of his own, I suppose, when his was not quite what it should be.
Yeah.
I think also, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think as well, you can like a villain and a villain's actions, but know that it's fiction, and you wouldn't condone that in real life.
Exactly.
And you're allowed to separate the two.
Of course, yeah, of course. Like, obviously, fiction is fiction. But
some people online don't seem to get that. And it's like, well, if you like this villain, then you're obviously evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's a whole psychology lesson in here somewhere, I'm sure. But yeah, I think obviously, that if Joe was living next door to you and you saw bodies going in and out, you would definitely kind of either move or report it to the police and then move so they can't find you. I think
Yeah, exactly. And change your name.
Imagine if, like, he was your next door neighbor and you actually got along with him, like you actually liked him as a person.
Yeah.
But then you found out what was going on. That's like mind fuckery on a whole level of crazy.
God, yeah.
The psycho next door.
Have you guys ever seen the movie Sleeping with the Enemy?
Oh God, a very long time ago.
Yeah, I think
that is one where so Julia Roberts plays a wife who basically, not to give anything away, whoever hasn't seen it, but you should see it. It's very psychologically, it's very intense, where she's in an unhappy marriage. He's like a perfectionist. Everything, towels have to be just so, I mean, it's like I would probably kill him if this was my husband because he's just obnoxious. But she actually tries to go ahead, and she's an excellent swimmer. She stages her drowning and then escapes from him. But there's no likability whatsoever in him. I mean, whoever wrote that screenplay for that character, they made him very unlikable, very unsympathetic. And he had something I've seen in, some of these movies called dead eyes, where you look at his eyes and they just don't have, they're dead. They look just evil. There's no life whatsoever. And they don't look very, very welcoming. But that's another good character that I'm just like, oh, I'd be running the other way. And he comes across very likable to friends, but nobody knows what's going on behind closed doors. So it's interesting.
It's interesting. I wonder if now I just want to know what his backstory is. So like, I was like, why is he like this? What happened?
I know. That's a good question.
I think it's, when you're a writer, it's really important to think about why is a question that you have to ask a lot. Like, why? Why would they do this? Or if you're not sure, it's like, well, would they do that? It's a lot of kind of asking questions about what your characters might or might not do. And again, it is especially so with villains, because you have to nail them so perfectly to make them kind of jump out of the page.
Yeah.
But I've loved this discussion. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
Hearing about everyone's favorite villains is good. So next up, we should really get jingles. I need jingles, but I haven't worked out how to do that yet. We'll come back to that. We want to
music sites again.
Yeah, have another look. Should record our own little funky ones.
You know what? You guys will laugh. You'll laugh at this. You guys Claire is a Star Wars person, so I have to tell you something funny. Speaking of jingles, I always like to hear the Emperor's March. I know that sounds crazy, but I always think before I play tennis, I have to play that because I want to make an entrance.
Yeah.
I think Emperor's March for me would be, or the Batman.
I love that
for obvious reasons.
Villains always have the best music, don't they? It's like 90% of my favorite Disney songs are the villain songs.
Villain songs, yeah.
I know. So
songs.
Is the filmmaker trying to tell us something to get some sympathy for those villains? Little hidden message.
What's your favorite villain song, Claire?
Ooh, probably Poor Unfortunate Souls.
Oh, that's a good one.
But I do really love Gaston as well.
Oh, that's my favorite.
I
Gaston.
don't like the character of Gaston though. He's a complete arsehole, but Ursula is like,
See, Gaston is my like weird, random, like villain love. He's just ridiculous. But like, look at him. It's beautiful.
have you seen Moana,
They
the
have
one
not.
with the Rocky? Right,
No.
that
No.
villain song, it's called Shiny, and it's a crab that covers himself in jewels.
Okay.
That song is so underrated. I've heard people say that like they thought it was a weak villain song and stuff. And no, it's when I first heard it, I was like, oh my god, this sounds like David Bowie. So that's my other favourite villain song.
It's on my list of movies that I have
It's
to watch. But
amazing. I would say it's one of the best Disney movies.
okay, cool. I will check it out. Anyway, onwards. We went off on a tangent, which we will do probably every 10 seconds or so, because that's what we do.
Yes.
So we wanted to look at new releases for October. And obviously with it being Halloween month, we thought we would stick with a bit of a paranormal trend. So we are going to tell you about some amazing books that are coming out this month. Who's going first?
I'll go if you want.
Go on.
All right. Them by T.S. Arthur. It only takes a moment. Marnie Brown has been exploring the great outdoors with the local youth group for the last week. Lonely without the company of Jake, her best and only friend. She's eager to make up after their latest argument. Her uneventful trip takes a sinister turn when sirens wake her, causing panic throughout the camp. As they return home, the sights Marnie sees leave her with more questions than answers, including who the adults mean when they talk about them. But there's one thing she wants to know more than anything else. Sorry.
She got stuck.
God, I hate that one. Okay. Here we go. Where's Jake? Them is an introduction to the Tempest series. If you like a fight for survival more than anything, God, I'm sorry, I'm not able
Okay,
to.
don't worry.
Can I start again?
Just do that last bit again. It's all right.
Okay. Her uneventful trip takes a sinister turn when sirens wake her, causing panic through the camp. As they return home, the sights Marnie sees leaves her with more questions than answers, including who the adults mean when they talk about them. But there's one thing she wants to know more than anything else. Where's Jake? Them is an introduction to the Tempest series. If you like a fight for survival, teenage angst. Oh God, I'm sorry, I can't.
Sorry, don't worry. I got the end. So teenage
Okay.
angst and a feisty heroine. Then you'll love T.S. Arthur's debut foray into YA romance. Don't worry, you got it. It's hard on the screen sometimes to get stuck.
Yeah.
I know, it's weird.
I have read this book and it's really very good. It's already available on Kindle, but it's going to be released wide on the 31st of October. So if you are a reader on any other device than Kindle, then you can check it out at the end of the month.
I'm going to grab this because it's saying, from what I've heard T.S. Arthur say, it sounds like it's an interesting spin on like vampire type creatures.
It's really cool.
cool.
Because it's sort of when I was reading, I was like, zombies? And it's like, no, it's not necessarily zombies, it's actually vampires. And it's really cool. And
Yeah.
I've also heard a bit about how the series is going to go. So I was like, oh,
Ooh.
it's really suspenseful.
Mm.
Like it starts off and you've got kind of Marnie on this trip and she's like, everything's just got a bit weird and they don't know what's going on and they've all got to get on the bus and go home. And it's like, what is happening? And it's
Yeah.
built up really
Ooh.
nicely as to when she gets back to her hometown and then it's the panic, like you can feel all of like, oh, where is everyone? Is my family okay? It's just a really good book and I'm excited to see what happens with the rest of the series.
It sounds amazing. I want to go and read it now.
Go
Talking of amazing books, I have The Blight of the Necromancer by Christine Rains. It's
I love her.
Yes, third and final book in her lit RPG series. I've read all the series. It's brilliant. So here's the blurb. When offered the choice between the tedious research or fighting a dragon, the players always choose the dragon, even when they're dangerously outmatched. No one rational ever wants to play as a bard, but Nora Quinn believed that she could use her class's skills of perception to her advantage as an investigator. As Esther of the Elven Bard, she regrets picking the role now that the players are trapped in the dark realm of Cloithia. She desperately desires to go home, but her friends want to stay in the fantasy world, causing a rift in the party. To lift the Spectre Plague curse from the land and win the game, the heroes must defeat the conniving necromancer, yet he's shadowing them with death the entire way. Seeking the tools they need, Nora and her friends must survive perilous side quests and hordes of undead. The answer how to slay the villain lies in the western ruins, but Nora is certain he's the only one who can get her home, and for that, he needs to stay alive. Nora must choose between killing the necromancer and lifting the curse, or siding with him and going home. Neither choice feels like a victory.
Wow, that
Yes,
sounds amazing.
it's so good. It's a lit RPG, and I think that might put some people off because they'll immediately think Dungeons and Dragons, and they'll think if you don't know anything about role play games and that sort of stuff that you won't get it. That's not true at all. If you know anything about fantasy, if you like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or King Killer Chronicles, any of the good fantasy books, you will love this. Because yes, it has RPG elements. They have stats. Their stats increases classes like bards and sorcerers and stuff. But at its core, it is a brilliant fantasy with just brilliant world building. It's
Does she write as Christine Rains or C Rains?
I think for these she writes as C Rains because I think it's a very male-dominated genre.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Christine Rains is someone Claire and I knew from many years ago when we were blogging. And to this day, I still remember she had this amazing book, and I don't know if it's still published. And it was about, I think it was about Monster Under the Bed. And it was bloody
Yes.
phenomenal. Fearless,
I'm
yes.
pretty sure it's still on Amazon.
Phenomenal book.
It's kind of like Buffy, but with a sassy sidekick and
Yeah,
the monsters under the bed, as you said.
it's a really cool book.
Mm.
Christine's an amazing author. So when are we releasing? When's that one releasing?
That is the 13th of October.
Friday the 13th.
Yes.
Of course.
Brilliant.
What other date could it be?
Brilliant.
Is that, do you know if that's Kindle only or wide?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I will put it in the show. There's going to be links to all the books that we mention on the Facebook page. So I will make a note of whether it's Amazon only or wide.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have our very own Claire Dunmore. She's like, I'm not reading about my own book.
You read it.
But now I have to learn how to pronounce words. So, bear with me. So, Claire is doing something a little bit different, which I very much appreciate. Some of you may have heard of the platform Ream, which is for authors. It's a subscription-based service. Absolutely amazing platform. And Claire is releasing one of her books slowly with her subscription. And it's called Wings, Witches and Wonder. And it sounds fabulous. Okay, so here is the blurb for you. Bear with me, as I said, because pronunciation.
Fantasy worlds.
Yeah, this is where I get lost. This is one of the reasons why fantasy books stress me. I was like, but I don't know what it says.
Yeah.
Okay. He came to me in my dreams, whispering my name, Madeline, the man made of alabaster. Ever since her magical abilities manifested at 13, Madeline Grant has been dreaming of the alabaster man and hearing his voice called out to her. Now a fully fledged member of the supernatural order of the Ansel, Madeline uses her biokinetic abilities to help others, while in secret she searches for the man from her dreams. When her dreams lead Madeline to the allegedly haunted Junction Brew Ring on the British southeastern coast, she finds a hidden barrow buried underground. And there in a chamber, leading off from the barrow's many labyrinthine tunnels, she finds the alabaster man of her dreams. Using an ancient grimoire, Madeline combines her biokinetic abilities with blood magic to awaken the alabaster man, who reveals himself as Calas, the last of an ancient race of supernatural humanoid beings called the Kralian?
Kralian, yeah.
Kralian, just checking. Having dreamed of Calas for almost half of her life, Madeline is drawn to his ethereal beauty and impressive physical form, and soon sparks are flying as the two unite. But everything Madeline thought she knew is soon called into question when Calas reveals it was an early form of the Order of the Ansile, who wiped out the Kralian, and that a witch with abilities very much like her own imprisoned him in stone. Now Madeline is torn between the only place that's ever really felt like home and the only man she's ever loved. Ooh, that's love.
Sounds great.
Amazing.
It's long, but
Long. We can work on that. But yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. And I am really looking forward to having a look at that because I love a bit of magic. Love a bit of mystery. It's all good. But yeah, Claire's book will be available on Ream. So is it, remind me again, Ream's, is it Ream Stories?
reamstories.com/Claire Dugmore.
Nice and simple.
Yes, and again in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll have a link. If you just go to Ream, if you can't, if you get lost and you want to kind of look at it before we get the post up, just go to Ream. You can just search Claire Dugmore and her name will pop magically. So all good. So that is our month's reads. I've lost my place, which is really unfortunate. Bear with me, I'm so sorry. Someone else tell me what's happening next, please. I've got it. I've got it. Okay, I've done it. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I lost my I've got my running order beside me and I was like, I pressed a button.
Oh no.
Yeah, I can't be trusted. Like I said, we will get better, I promise.
I know we're working out the kinks. It's always that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. It's also unhelpful that I'm not in my own house currently. Oh, excuse
I
me.
was going to say the wallpaper looks different.
Looks
Yes,
really nice.
we're at my other half's mum's house this week. So by the time it goes live, I'll be back in my own house. But for today, so I don't have everything set up how I would like it. Excuse me. Okay. So I think we had a question, didn't we?
Yes.
Do you know what it is? Was I can't find it.
All I can think of is that we discussed what would be on next month's podcast. I can't remember the question.
We can cut this out, right?
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
I'm so sorry.
I'll see if I can find it.
I know what we did, but we hadn't thought. So what we did, questions for us, we can answer. So we do have an email address.
Yes,
and it is.
I don't know whether you want to do that bit again because for me it was all laggy, so I don't know whether.
Okay. Whereabouts did it go wrong?
From I think from like when you were saying we have a question.
Okay.
Like when you find it.
Oh, I love the internet. Yeah, it just came off my screen. The internet is unstable. Yes, so am I.
Join the club.
Okay, as we were. Questions, yeah. Yes. We're gonna have every month we're gonna have a question for you guys to email in, and there will be prizes available and everything. For our first week though, because we've had a giveaway, a quite big one, we're gonna just do a generic question. So we thought if you had any questions for us, then you can send us an email to Claire. What's our email address?
It is podcast whwn@gmail.com.
Thank you. I had it written down and I got it wrong. So yes, podcast whwn@gmail.com. So if you've got any questions for us, we will answer them on the show next month. We're gonna have kind of our own little segment of questions and answers from you guys. Usually it will be more about you than us, but because it's our first week, we thought you might have things you wanted to to ask us about. Next month on the show, we decided to take advantage of the firework theme, with it being bonfire night in the UK. Not a thing for Americans, I know, or most, I think anyone else.
No, it's just the UK that like to burn criminals on bonfires.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah.
So to celebrate that, we thought fireworks, sparks, enemies to lovers. So we are going to be discussing enemies to lovers next month, excuse me. Sorry, I got too excited. So if you want to tune in to listen to us discuss that topic, if you've got any book recommendations, you can email those as well at the email address we just mentioned. But until next time, I think that's a wrap.
Yes.
Nice.
Thank you for listening.
All right.
Yes, thank you for listening and watching.
Thank you so much, and thank you for putting up with our little hiccups with our unstable internet and our not being able to find our place. But we will be back. We will be back in 1 month's time with the Enemies to Lovers podcast special. And thank you so much, and we will see you soon.
Goodbye.